Let's begin with the foundations. Welcome to another lecture where we take popular culture apart with tweezers and, ideally, put it back together without any leftover screws. Today our subject is Spider-Noir, the American superhero noir series developed for MGM Plus and Prime Video. It stars Nicolas Cage as Ben Reilly, a weary private investigator known on the street as the Spider. I am Professor Alexei, and with me is Priyanka, whose questions are usually the bits you actually remember after the episode ends.
Hi everyone. I'll try to ask the questions you might be thinking about, and maybe a few you weren't yet.
To frame our discussion, it's important to understand what Spider-Noir is and what it is not. It is a live-action series set in an alternate corner of Sony's Spider-Man universe, distinct from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and separate from the animated Spider-Verse films. Nicolas Cage plays Ben Reilly, called the Spider in universe, who operates as a hard-boiled private investigator in 1930s New York. The noir genre here signifies moral ambiguity, smoky interiors, long shadows, and a fatalism that assumes everyone is compromised. The private investigator role, classically, is our lens on systemic rot. This show further complicates that lens with metahuman elements, powers that often corrode the body and the soul, which is frankly very on brand for noir. Now, two technical choices matter. First, the series launched simultaneously in two presentations: authentic black and white and true hue full color. The black and white version pursues period fidelity. The color pass, inspired by Technicolor sensibilities, is saturated in a way the team dubbed true hue. In practice, the lighting was designed with black and white contrast in mind, and then the digital capture was split into two distinct post-production pipelines. As a result, the color is not merely a tint applied after the fact, but its own authored look. Critics, you see, compared the B&W mood to Chandler-esque shadows, while the color leaned towards something like Dick Tracy, by way of a Hopper nightscape. Secondly, this is a PI narrative, so the case of the week structure sits atop a larger seasonal conspiracy, allowing modular stories without abandoning continuity.
I think the format decision is interesting. Does the dual release say something about how streamers try to reach, two audiences at once? Cinephiles and casual viewers?
Arguably, yes. In this context, the two cuts function as a soft A/B test baked into the art. One edition invites viewers who fetishize chiaroscuro. The other invites those who prefer pulp color and heightened iconography. Releasing both encourages comparison, conversation, and crucially for a streaming economy, rewatching. Moving forward, why this show matters now. Contemporary television thrives on genre blending, and Spider-Noir is a decisive blend. Noir crime grammar stitched to metahuman stakes. It also exemplifies platform strategy. Sony Pictures Television produces. Amazon MGM Studios distributes worldwide via Prime Video, with MGM Plus in the US window. The simultaneous two-format drop leverages the attention economy by making the show a conversation about both narrative and presentation. And, to some extent, it breaks from the youthful Spider-Man template, no high school, no prom, toward a grimmer, older subject, which freshens a very familiar brand.
Moving on. Can we cover the basic facts and the timeline before the deep questions?
Let's start with the history. In Spider-Noir's backstory, during World War I, Sergeant Peter Parker liberates prisoners from a German experimentation camp and is bitten by a creature referred to as Man-Spider. He survives with powers, but at significant moral and psychological cost. After the war, in the 1920s, he adopts the name Ben Reilly. In simpler terms, a self-authored reinvention to bury the boyish connotations of Peter Parker and to fit, if you will, into a trench coat rather than a varsity jacket. By the 1930s, he is a down-on-his-luck private investigator in an alternate New York, known as the Spider, having retired from vigilantism 5 years before the series proper, after the murder of his fiancée, Ruby J. Williams, by a criminal he had already brought in. The series begins when a new case forces him out of that self-imposed exile. On production facts, Oren Uziel and Steve Lightfoot are the co-showrunners and developers. Sony Pictures Television produces in association with Amazon MGM Studios, with executive producers Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, and Amy Pascal, among others. Harry Bradbeer executive produces and directs the first 2 episodes, with Nzinga Stewart also directing. The season runs 8 episodes of roughly 45 minutes. Principal photography took place in Los Angeles, even as the diegesis insists on New York. Darren Tiernan served as cinematographer, and the team used black and white-minded lighting on set. There was a brief wildfire-related pause in January 2025 before wrap in March 2025. The series premiered in May 2026 on MGM Plus in the United States, then globally on Prime Video later that month, with both authentic black and white and true hue full-color versions available from the outset. It is worth noting the supporting ensemble. Joe Robbie Robertson functions as our journalistic conscience. Felicia Cat Hardy, a chanteuse with sharpened edges, tilts the romantic and the dangerous. Janet Ruiz, the secretary who is also an investigator, offsets our hero's cynicism with competence. Lonnie Lincoln, Tombstone, and Flint Marko, Sandman, embody the show's fatalistic motif, namely that power is a slow poison. And Finbar Finn Byrne, known as Silvermane, administers philosophy with his menace. The score by Chris Bowers and Michael Dean Parsons marries period and modern textures. The lead single, Saving Grace, performed by Kirby, arrived in May 2026, with the full soundtrack landing alongside the global streaming drop that month.
That's a lot of careful world building. Also, the tagline, right? With no power comes no responsibility. It sets a pretty different tone from the usual creed.
Exactly. The marketing inverted the canonical Spider-Man maxim, signaling a protagonist who resists the moral mantle. The first trailer in February 2026 even arrived in both color and black and white cuts to underline that choice of mood as part of the premise. Before we proceed to the larger questions, a brief personal note. I came to noir by way of chess and Rachmaninoff. You wait, you listen, you commit. And if you misread the position, the endgame punishes you with elegance. Spider-Noir wears that logic openly. Cage has said the performance is 70% Humphrey Bogart and 30% Bugs Bunny. That combination, while amusing, is also accurate to the genre's trick of putting a glint of wit on top of a very dark coffee. This brings us to 3 questions worth dwelling on. First, the historical and creative question. Why not Peter Parker as the lead identity? Second, a counterfactual. What if the show had launched only in black and white? Third, the present-day industrial question. Will there be a second season? And if so, what would it look like within the show's own rules?
I've been wondering about this first one for a while. Why specifically choose Ben Reilly for live action when Spider-Man Noir in the comics is a Peter Parker variant? Is it mainly tonal, or are there brand reasons too?
Let's proceed to the next point. The choice is both tonal and strategic. Tonally, Peter Parker carries, as Uziel noted, boyish associations. The archetype is adolescent discovery, quips, and the pedagogy of responsibility. Noir, however, prefers experience to innocence. A trench coat rather than a Letterman jacket. Cigarette smoke rather than cafeteria chatter. By rechristening the man as Ben Reilly, the series aligns the hero with world weariness, and the wartime origin recasts his gifts as trauma's excess rather than puberty's surprise. Strategically, avoiding Peter clarifies that this is not the animated Spider-Verse continuity. Catherine Pope has framed this as a reimagining within Sony's Spider-Man universe, which allows a self-contained history to avoid multiverse entanglements. The in-universe moniker, the Spider, further distances the character from modern branding. It echoes pulp vigilantes, the Shadow, the Spirit, whose names sounded like rumors before they became headlines.
Can we say that this also changes how relationships function? Like Robbie Robertson's idealism versus Ben's cynicism, or Kat Hardy as a femme fatale who doesn't have to bounce off a teenager, but a damaged adult.
Exactly so. The character lattice gains weight. We observe that Robbie becomes a moral counterweight rather than a mentor surrogate. Felicia Cat Hardy can operate with ambiguity unsoftened by a coming-of-age frame. Janet Ruiz, as a competent investigator, trades banter on equal footing. Even the antagonists, Tombstone and Sandman, are rendered tragic by the slow decay of their own powers. Their bodies literalize Noir's thesis that corruption is inevitable. In conclusion on this point, removing Peter Parker frees the series to embrace a Chandler-esque moral geometry without apologizing for adulthood.
Building on that, what about the second question? If they had only released the black and white version, what do we lose or gain? Does it help prestige but hurt reach?
To elaborate, a black and white only launch would likely have intensified cinephile approval. The lighting and contrast were designed with that grammar in mind. The shadows are not a costume, they are the architecture. However, we can infer that a single format, B&W only approach narrows mainstream appetite. The True Hue edition, saturated and almost comic strip vivid, invites a second cohort to the party. Anthony Bresnikan at Esquire captured this bifurcation neatly. Color tilts toward Dick Tracy caper energy, black and white toward Chandler's abyss. From a streaming perspective, two authored versions catalyze social comparisons and rewatch behavior. Did you see how the nightclub scene plays in B&W versus color? That is an organic engagement mechanic. Remove that, and you probably get stronger critical consensus but a smaller conversation footprint, which for franchise strategy is a non-trivial trade-off.
I'm curious about the marketing layer. Without the color version, do you think events like the Alamo Drafthouse screenings or the dual trailers matter less? Or would they just lean harder into classic noir education?
Speaking of curation, the Alamo Drafthouse Web of Shadows series, The Third Man, In a Lonely Place, Kiss Me Deadly, Sweet Smell of Success, already functioned as a syllabus. In a B&W only scenario, the campaign would likely double down on that pedagogy. But the actual campaign leveraged dual trailers in February 2026, and the cheeky tagline with no power comes no responsibility, to telegraph both tone and choice. That choice itself was part of the hook. Remove it, and you must replace the hook. You gain purity. You lose the engineered debate that in contemporary attention markets keeps a title in circulation for more than a weekend.
Okay, last big question. Will there be a second season? And if so, how might they use their PI structure without breaking the period logic?
Let's shift focus to the industrial realities. Officially, at the time of release, no renewal had been announced. Showrunner Oren Uziel has expressed creative interest in exploring World War II, noting that the PI framework is portable. All it takes is a knock on the office door, and a new case can cross city lines or even war fronts. That is structurally elegant. The practical decision, however, rests on streamers' opaque metrics: viewership, completion, and press sentiment, plus costs. It is worth noting that specific budget figures were not disclosed. Industry chatter, including a Puck report about potential tensions over spending and the Lord Miller overall deal status, remained unconfirmed by Sony. Regardless, Lord and Miller stayed on as executive producers through release. In simpler terms, the creative engine is primed, but the green light is a business lever not yet pulled in public.
Maybe that's something we can come back to later. But purely narratively, if they do go to World War II, do you see threads that connect cleanly to Ben's past without feeling like a new show entirely?
Theoretically, yes. The character's origin in World War I gives him a soldier's memory and a spy's caution. A World War II arc could position the Spider against weaponized science consistent with the show's existing pathology, powers that degrade their hosts, while letting Robbie's journalism and Cat Hardy's ambiguities refract through wartime propaganda and black markets. The PI chassis tolerates travel and time jumps better than most superhero frames because the job is always the same. Someone knocks, a case opens, and the city, whichever city, proves itself guilty in new ways.
That was helpful to think through, actually. Thank you, Professor.
To summarize, Spider-Noir is a live-action superhero noir in an alternate SSU corner, starring Nicolas Cage as Ben Reilly, the Spider. It launched in May 2026 in parallel, authentic black and white and true hue full-color versions, and it situates a PI among long shadows and dying superpowers. We examined 3 questions. Why not Peter Parker? Because tone and brand clarity. What if only black and white? Greater purity, narrower reach. And will there be more? Creative interest exists, but renewal remains unannounced. For further study, consider Jessica Jones as a companion in noir-inflected superhero grammar, the Punisher for Lightfoot's gritty tendencies. And if you prefer celluloid ancestors, The Big Sleep and The Third Man. This then completes our present analysis. May your week be free of fatalistic monologues and poorly lit alleyways.
So, I guess that kind of sums it up. See you next time.